Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking on the day after the most acrimonious U.S. presidential debate ever. And we're talking about it in the company from Philadelphia. Michael Johns, co-founder of the National Tea Party movement, works with the Heritage Foundation. He's in Philadelphia. Many thanks for being with us. Welcome back as well from Southampton, New York, Lauren Leader-Shavi, co-founder and CEO of All Together. Soufiane El-Sabag, author of The New American Right, is with us. And we're joined from New York City by Rich Benjamin, senior fellow at the progressive think tank Demos Action and author of Searching for Whitopia, an improbable journey to the heart of white America. Just before the break, we heard Lauren Leader-Shavi mention how Trump's perhaps most startling statement to some, the disowning of his own running mates during the debate, it came up on the fact that Mike Pence is in favor of staring down the Russians when it comes to Syria.
Mr. Trump, let me repeat the question. If you were president, what would you do about Syria and the humanitarian crisis in Aleppo? And I want to remind you what your running mate said. He said provocations by Russia need to be met with American strength, and that if Russia continues to be involved in airstrikes along with the Syrian government forces of Assad, the United States of America should be prepared to use military force to strike the military targets of the Assad regime.
Okay. He and I haven't spoken, and I disagree. I disagree.
You disagree with your running mate?
I think we have to knock out ISIS.
Rich Benjamin, he and I haven't spoken. Donald Trump doesn't seem to really care that much about that.
No, not only does he not seem to know or care much about it, that to me was just his general cantankerousness. So he's cantankerous and hostile towards his opponent, Hillary Clinton, towards both moderators, towards women, and now his very own running mate. And so that, to me, felt his whole mood of just defensiveness and cantankerousness.
Yeah, but we heard, hang on, we heard Michael Johns. We heard Michael Johns in part one of our discussion say he's running an insurgent campaign against the establishment. Are you sure he's being cantankerous, or are you sure this isn't perhaps a little bit more thought through?
Against his own running mate. I mean, when Martha brought up the question and said, here is your running mate's position, and the running mate, presumably Mike Pence, has thought it out carefully, and to say off your cuff, oh, I just disagree, and dismiss it without really getting into why he disagrees, yeah, I very much think that is cantankerous.
Michael Johns?
You would benefit from having, or I mean, in my time in the White House, this was certainly the case of having a divergent number of viewpoints around all sorts of policy issues. Donald Trump will ultimately decide what American policy is towards Syria. I don't really think there is much of a divide between the two. I think it was perhaps presented that way, but I think they both are in an agreement, as the American people are, that the destruction of ISIS is far and away the first and foremost priority of our policy in the region, and that supersedes really almost anything else. The Russia engagement is a little bit of a wild card. And, you know, in an optimistic vision of the future and an optimistic vision of the Trump presidency, you would have a restored relationship from a relationship that Hillary Clinton, frankly, has destroyed in her 4 years as Secretary of State. And I think that would be essentially the Trump approach. I thought that came across, you know, very clearly. Also, it's very much a misstatement to say that there is any universal view of women on this election. We had last night in St. Louis 4 women that say they were sexually assaulted by Hillary Clinton's husband, and then subsequently derided and verbally abused by her. That is not either going over well with anyone. It's not simply a women's issue. I think all of us look at that and find it very unsettling.
Every credible news source that is not, by the way, Breitbart with a right-wing agenda. Can you hear? Sorry. Every credible news source that doesn't bring a right-wing agenda to the so-called news has absolutely resoundingly debunked the claim that Hillary in any way mocked victims of assault. The second piece is that in the 1990s, excuse me, In the 1990s, when we had Ken Starr spend a year investigating the Clintons, investigating Bill Clinton, you had the entire United States Congress looking into his conduct. Don't you think that if any of these allegations were credible, because all of them come from before the impeachment trial of Bill Clinton, don't you think that if any of them were credible, that Ken Starr would have turned them up and included them in the multi-thousand-page report that he did on the Clintons? So if you had a conservative who was actually prosecuting our president at the time for behavior that was obviously unbecoming of his office, and these issues did not come up then, how credible do we really think they are? The bottom line is that Donald Trump has brought these issues up over and over again because he refuses to take responsibility for his own atrocious behavior. And even his surrogates, you've got Rudy Giuliani and everyone else who's been in his corner every step of the way, have said that his actions were indefensible. And yet instead of being contrite, instead of offering a real admission of impropriety and bad behavior, he doubled down on attacking his opponent on an absolutely unfounded basis. So it just speaks to how low our candidate on the Republican side is willing to go to deflect from his own atrocious record with women. He's never winning them back. No one believes these issues. They don't matter because until he takes responsibility for his own appalling behavior, no insult he can throw at the Clintons will make a difference. This is appealing to the base, to a very small number of people who read nothing but extreme right-wing conspiracy theories. He threw out at least 6 of them last night, and it is not credible or...
Let me say this. Hillary Clinton said a few months back that sexual assault victims should be believed. Now we find, in your case, for instance, when it's not politically expedient to do that, they're disbelieving.
I do believe that in 25 years, in 25 years, in a climate where there has been enormous scrutiny on the Clintons and endless opportunities to investigate these claims and find out whether or not they were actually indeed true, you're going to tell me that nobody in the last 30 years looked at this? It's ridiculous. Of course they did.
There was an $850,000 civil settlement paid and a confidentiality agreement thrown on these harassment issues. I don't. These are centerpieces.
I want to second. I want to second her comment that.
All right. I'm gonna have to break in here because we can't all talk at once. One at a time.
Yeah.
Rich Benjamin.
Yeah, I want to second her comment that essentially this is a diversion. It's a media tactic of Donald Trump where, in essence, he hasn't taken responsibility or he hasn't adequately addressed to women voters who represent half the country his comments, which are not just locker room banter, but they sound like those of a sexual predator. And no wonder women are concerned. Nobody said every woman thinks this very same thing about that, but that doesn't vitiate or that doesn't erase the basic nature and substance of those comments that so many Republicans find indefensible.
All right, there was one time when Hillary Clinton was very much on the defensive. She was pressed about leaked comments she made in private to bankers about politicians having to have a public face and a private face. Let's take a listen.
Is it acceptable for a politician to have a private stance on issues?
That was something I said about Abraham Lincoln after having seen the wonderful Steven Spielberg movie called Lincoln.
She lied. Now she's blaming the lie on the late, great Abraham Lincoln. That's one that I haven't. Okay, Honest Abe. Honest Abe never lied. That's the good thing. That's the big difference between Abraham Lincoln and you.
Rich Benjamin, this is going to feed into the narrative that Hillary Clinton is in the pocket of special interests and that she's one of the rarefied elites.
I think it was a very long-winded, confusing answer to a very basic question. And I did see the movie, and I remember exactly the part of the movie she was talking about. But if you haven't seen the movie recently, you could easily get lost in that answer. So I think very much potentially it plays into that narrative that she's two-faced, that she's telling her donors one set of things and she's telling the public another set of things. I think there was just a simpler, more concise answer that she could have given, and that is, yes, you speak one way, not substantively, but just stylistically to some people, people you know, people who speak a different language, people who have a different set of assumptions and information, and then the public, sometimes you might simplify what you're trying to say. And so, to Donald Trump's credit, that was one of his very few rhetorical moments where he could pivot that and turn it into a joke.
More broadly, the rage that Donald Trump is tapping into is genuine, and she seems to have trouble with that rage.
Polls show that, yeah, she does. But I mean, that's part of her strength and part of her weakness. When you've been in public office for so long and you've done so much, you have a greater record to scrutinize. You do change your mind over that amount of period. And I'm not defending her. I don't even wish to say, you know, everything she's changed her mind on, whether it be same-sex marriage, whether it be on certain trade agreements, are agreeable or defensible. But she is open to that criticism, and she probably realizes in hindsight she could have given a more concise, direct, and perhaps witty answer.
Michael Johns, let me ask you, because the movement you were part of, the Tea Party movement, is basically to get Washington off the backs of people, to pay less tax. And now you've got this candidate who doesn't really, he talks about tax breaks, yeah, but he's not really talking about smaller government. His agenda seems pretty different in that he's appealing to working class voters, saying to them that he's not necessarily in favor of smaller government. It's a big shift for the Republican Party.
Not real. Well, I think it's an evolving position, and I think both of these political parties have evolved. I think that's true of the Democratic Party with the Sanders candidacy. But in the case of Trump, you know, he's supporting lower tax rates at every marginal rate. He's reducing the number of rates, meaning making the tax code more simplified. He's getting rid of Common Core. He's getting rid of Obamacare. These are all things that are very consistent with the Tea Party movement agenda.
Hang on, like he says he's getting rid of Obamacare, but he says he's replacing it with something else. He's not like downsizing the government so much. He's not talking in terms of basically streamlining everything in Washington at all.
Well, he's talking about getting rid of the federal role and micromanagement of education, which is a very big issue among American people generally. And he's talking about a very substantial cut in tax rates, while Hillary Clinton is talking about raising them. Importantly, talking about, I think, cutting rates among middle income and lower income workers who really do need that break. And that's a little bit of a shift to be, as you correctly point out, within the position of the Republican Party. But I think it's a very constructive shift. The Republican Party has no future if it can't appeal to working Americans. And I think the Trump candidacy on a whole bunch of levels, on trade, on the borders, on immigration, on taxes, on regulation, is appealing to working America. And that's what's got, frankly, the left and the Hillary Clinton mammoth crowd of supporters in their political elite positions so terrified.
Soufiane El-Sabag, let me ask you about this, because we've seen with the Brexit vote how traditional Labour Party supporters are instead, in some cases, turning to UKIP. But they're not turning towards a libertarian vision of the United States, of Britain in their case. Yep. Is Donald Trump a Republican?
I don't think he is. I don't think he is, for two reasons, really. I think first, he's not a Republican candidate, that's for sure, but he's not even, to me, an American candidate. Let me tell you why. There are two tenets of American history, and I think it's free trade and it's immigration. If you ignore that, if you just want to do away with it, I mean, you're just not even representing American values, and that's where Donald Trump's candidacy is today. And I think it doesn't make any sense to say that you defend working Americans when you want to lower taxes for everybody, but when that obviously will benefit the richer American, of course. So it doesn't make sense to me. I'm sorry, you may favor the uneducated American by going all the way on Mexicans or women or Muslims, whatever, you name it. But again, working Americans will be better off with Obamacare, with higher taxes, with bigger government programs and so on.
Michael John's saying they don't support it.
I don't think so. I mean, you have two classes of working Americans, obviously. You have those in the Northeast who will make Democrats win again by winning Ohio, by winning Pennsylvania, by winning Michigan. And you have, that's right, I mean, a working class more in the South who doesn't care that much about taxes, I think, but more about identity politics. And that's where Donald Trump is playing right now. He's not playing for working people, he's working for uneducated people.
Lauren Leader-Chevy.
Yeah, look, world history is full of examples of leaders who have exploited the economic hardships of people by blaming minorities, in some instances Jews, anyone who is an outsider who's viewed as a potential enemy. The world is riddled. Let me finish. The world is riddled with examples of leaders who have used economic difficulties to blame others for the problems that are actually far more complex. And Donald Trump has absolutely done that by blaming immigration, which is at historic lows, by the way, by constantly blaming immigration for some of the economic issues that we have today. And it plays to the fears and the anxieties of people who may not have enough experience to know otherwise, or for whom that resonates. But it's simply factually incorrect. And the reality is that the Republican Party, one of the reasons why they've broken with him, is that his economic policies are so absolutely in opposition of what Republicanism has stood for at least a generation, which is expanding American business opportunities through globalization, through expanded opportunities overseas, through open trade, which I appreciate that he believes is the root of all evil in our economy, but it's actually really not the case. But he's found a way to blame what are fundamentally critical changes in the world, technicalization, the internet age, all kinds of forces of disruption that have had an enormous impact on the American economy. It's a far more complicated issue than he wants to admit. And so in the absence of ability to explain this in any meaningful way to Americans, he blames immigrants, which has a long history of negative examples, but it has worked. And it's worked very effectively for a very small number of Americans. And again, it will continue to resonate with some, but on balance, because of who we are as a country, because we actually have had massive demographic shifts over the last generation, it is an absolutely losing strategy on the national stage.
That's right.
Michael Johns.
Well, actually, there's no real distinction among views on illegal immigration or border security among any demographic in the country. Every demographic in this country opposes that. By the way, one of the revelations in the WikiLeaks documents that you referred to previously was Hillary Clinton's admission that she supports no border, open borders, at a time when ISIS has promised to infiltrate this country. That's utterly unacceptable and a non-starter and really a delegitimizing point. Additionally, I gave you your time. Let me just kind of respond. I think, and also to say that the Republican Party is breaking with Trump is an outrageous misstatement. Donald Trump has just gotten done winning more Republican votes than any presidential candidate in the history of this country. He is the leader of this party, and he is redefining it to 21st century realities in ways that are entirely needed and constructive. And they are designed to address the deficiencies that this administration and Hillary Clinton have failed to address on every front over the last 8 years.
If that is true, why is it that the Republican National Committee is withdrawing their economic support for his campaign? Because they know that it spells doom for the party for years to come. Embracing the rhetoric of Donald Trump will mean total destruction of the Republican Party as we know it. It is a losing strategy. After 2012, when Romney lost, the Republican Party.
Let me just break in here because there is a Trump effect being felt here in France. The primary race for November's presidential nominee for center-right is in full swing, and the country's former leader, Nicolas Sarkozy, trailing in the polls, has, some critics say, gone Trumpian, with a steady stream of shock statements like reversing himself and questioning climate change, suggesting a referendum to intern suspected Islamist radicals. Here's what he had to say at a rally in Paris this weekend.
I am a candidate to talk about the lives of French people. not to be the representative of a small elite for whom everything is fine. An elite so powerful in the government and the media, but actually such a minority in our country.
Soufiane Assabaghh, I don't know how far he's going to get with that, but that rage against globalization, against the elites, is real.
Yeah, and there's a trend. I mean, you see it. You see it in France. You see it in the UK with the Brexit, with Boris Johnson, and so on. You see it, obviously, in Eastern Europe, with a lot of referendums going after women's rights and really basic things. You see it in Spain. You see it everywhere. And I think there's a tendency where you have uneducated people gaining a voice among the political class who, instead of going high, actually go low to gain votes. And I just don't think it's a working strategy for the years to come. And I hope it's going to get real when Nicolas Sarkozy is defeated in the next few weeks.
All right. There's a statement there.
No, I mean, it's the truth. I mean, you just can't go on this way. I mean,
you're unequivocal. Soufiane Assabaghh, I want to thank you. I want to thank Michael Johns for joining us from Philadelphia. I want to thank Laura Leader-Chevy from Southampton, New York, Rich Benjamin in New York City. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon, Media Watch. The figures are just in. 59 million people watched, less than the first debate, but it's the most ever tweeted event.
Unsurprisingly, because of all the crazy things that were said, the kind of vicious attacks on both sides, and the lead up to the debate in particular, which saw Donald Trump in just a disastrous position. Let's take a look first of all at this New York Times article, which is being updated since August, when there seemed to be the beginning of a kind of breakaway of those who had supported Donald Trump and who were now unendorsing him, so to speak. And you can see that they have updated this article to take account for those who have unendorsed Donald Trump, senior Republicans, since the controversial tape where he made remarks about grabbing women's body parts, etc. And you can see here the list of prominent Republicans, governors, senators, etc., who have jumped off the Trump ship, so to speak. What else do we have regarding this context? Some who are very unforgiving, in fact, of all of those Republicans who had endorsed Donald Trump and are now revising their position. This is one such article by Jeffrey Young for the Huffington Post saying, "You knew who Donald Trump was when you endorsed him. Don't pretend that we didn't know what sort of a personality he was and what sort of remarks he had made about women, about minorities, about immigrants, etc." So some saying, well, a little too late to be reflecting on your position now. Obviously, Paul Ryan, the House Republican House leader, in a very difficult position with many of his sort of colleagues, senior Republicans, having unendorsed Donald Trump. He's keeping mum. He's not saying anything. And he has publicly endorsed Donald Trump. He was very vocal in his defense of Donald Trump even after the first debate, but obviously in a very difficult position now. And so, according to the Washington Post, he now will not defend or campaign for Trump ahead of the election and will stay very much focused on the House of Representatives, etc. Now, for the polls, many polls coming in, all of them really giving Clinton the victory in this debate, but by varying margins. YouGov is probably the closest. Nate Silver here on 538.com being very closely looked at as well, and he's giving Hillary Clinton a huge chance of success. His analysis of that is worth reading as well. The second debate probably didn't help Trump, and he really needed it. He talks about the run-up to the debate almost being like a stock market crash for Donald Trump. The first 20 minutes, he said it, watching the first 20 minutes of that debate, when, of course, the issue of that recording, the so-called locker room recording, as Donald Trump likes to refer to it, he said it was fair to really think after those first 20 minutes, is Trump's campaign finished? Is it now over? But he did rally after those first 20 minutes, and he actually did about as well as he could, but not good enough.
Yeah, because our correspondent Philip Crowther is saying that the polls we're seeing, except for those little snap polls, which, the polls we're seeing were done before
Right.
the comments.
Right. So again, another reason to think that the polling is really not very good for him at all. Hillary Clinton picking one of the more favourable polls for her and referring to herself in the third person in a very sort of monarchical fashion. Now, of course, totally different kettle of fish if you go to the alt-right media, Breitbart.com. The art of the comeback. Donald dominates the debate, and so there you go. Now, we've very little time left, so I'm going to just show you some of the online buzz, if I can get to it. We had a lot of, I suppose, people making fun of the whole locker room excuse. He said remarks made about women were simple locker room discourse. Well, some people were thinking those sort of remarks about women, I'm not sure if that's really what you hear most of the time in real locker room talk. My knee is still making that clicking sound. You think that's weird? This is real locker room talk, of course. And others such as, bro, quit popping me with that towel. Or, dude, can I borrow some of your Axe spray? And the final one there in real locker room talk is, did you hear that new moronic thing Trump said yesterday? So people were having a lot of fun on Twitter with that particular sort of excuse, I suppose you could call it, that not everyone bought it, François.
All right, not everyone bought it, indeed. Many thanks, James Creedon. We want to thank you and thank our panel for being with us here in the France 24 debate. There's much more on this to come.